What's up YouTube, Dal here from Zephyr War Games, and today I am bringing you the top 10 budget side deck cards that you might want to be looking at picking up while they are still cheap in order to counteract the upcoming meta. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. So I'm going to take you through these 10 cards right here. Some of them are pretty much the same cards, so they do give you other alternatives. But the idea behind this is we're trying to keep it on a budget. So for all of you that are either going to go and buy cash tiers and go, right, okay, now I can't buy triple tactic talents or triple tactic thrust, you still have options. Or for those of you like, you know what, I'm not about to drop £600 on the new meta deck. I'm actually going to stick with my Crystal Beast, or I'm going to stick with my Labyrinths. And these are the type of cards I'm going to need to look into to keep from breaking the wallet. So we'll start off with probably the most hype cards for this set in my opinion. These are probably like the best ones. And you've got Book of Eclipse and Book of Lunar Eclipse. You can consider Book of Moon if you want to, and you can also consider Swords of Concealing Light. However, the reason I've gone with Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse are these are cards that can be activated at any point in the turn, so draw phase, standby phase, you name it. And especially when you're up against cash tiers, you're probably going to want to be doing it during the draw phase so that Shangri-La can't trigger its effect. Now, obviously, both of these have pros and cons, which is why I wanted to show both of them off. Now, Lunar Eclipse is slightly starting to creep up as it has had less prints than Eclipse. Eclipse has got a common, a super, and an ultra, and I believe the ultra last time I checked was £1. Me personally, I'm quite leaning more towards Eclipse because it Book of Moons absolutely everything, but we'll talk about all of its inputs and downputs altogether. So starting off with Eclipse, Eclipse changes all face-up monsters on the field to face-down defense position, and then during the end phase this turn, flip as many cards face-up that were in defense position by this effect, and your opponent draws a card for each one flipped. Now, the benefit of a card like this is it flips all monsters. So if you're going to get locked down with a card, as long as it's not a token, and even then you can still deal with it, you can actually Book of Moon or flip the entire board face down. It can be activated as it is a quick play during any phase, as I've mentioned before, and this will stop your opponent being able to Shangri-La during the standby phase. And it also turns off the Shangri-La lock, as we've already established that even if Shangri-La is negated, it will still keep the zones locked, but if it is face down, all the zones will unlock themselves. The biggest weakness of Eclipse is the fact that it does draw cards, and because it does draw cards in all of the effect, it can be ashed and negated, which is a big sad should your opponent have it at the exact time. On the flip side, this is where Lunar Eclipse comes in to deal with the weakness of normal Eclipse. So Lunar Eclipse is discard one card to target 2 face-up monsters on the field and change them to face-down defense position. Now again, the issue with this card is it does target, it also discards as cost, which under something like a Kashtira, a Rise Heart, it may be a negative for you because it will get banished, but ultimately if you want a card in the graveyard, you don't really mind. The other downside as well is it only gets rid of 2 cards, which dealing with your opponent is not a big issue. But then if you're considering the Ibli lock and something else coming into the format, something like an Ido lock or even a Ra Disciple lock coming off of Branded as well, it's something that can be used for one of yours and one of your opponents, but that's where Eclipse will come into it as well. So when you look at the 2 cards side by side, obviously, like I've said, they both have pros and cons. Me, personally, I'm leaning more towards the Eclipse, and you probably run that risk of if they have the Ash, it will happen. You could also wait a little bit longer as well, let them get the summon from the deck and try and bait the Ash out before you flip the Eclipse, or chain the Eclipse to something else, but you do need to keep in mind that everything is going to be banished. Now that's just in the Kashtira example. When you do consider the Flunder matchup and of course the Tier Element matchup, both these are very, very good as well. Obviously, the massive benefit is Eclipse is that it does not target, so even when you look at a Tier Element board or a Sprite board, as long as they haven't got an Omni Negate, and if they do have an Omni Negate, they will need to burn it off to deal with it, it will allow you to flip the entire board face down. Of course, in the Flunder matchup as well, they will continue to be able to summon, but you get straight away, you get rid of the Barrier Statue lock, and you also get rid of the M-Pen negate as well, which is really, really important, unless they want to loop back to it, which is absolutely fine because you still dealt with that Barrier Statue, which is the biggest issue you would have probably faced, and then you can kind of start picking away at the board and go from there. And the same could be said for Lunar Eclipse. Lunar Eclipse, you're pretty much only going to target 2 cards. The idea that is, because you can activate these during draw phase and standby phase, it means they can't activate Dreaming Town or anything like that. Smashers can be a little bit interactive with you in regards to the Sprite matchup, but even then, you're kind of reducing your opponent to one form of interruption. Yes, they will still have Elf that will allow them to loop a couple of cards around, so that is another negative for that kind of matchup, but you still have a lot of options that are covered. Moving on to the next ones that are pretty similar, but I'll explain the reason why we've got both presented is Raigeki and Dark Hole as it slides away. So the reason we've got both of these is there are times when your opponent will, example, give you an Ibli lock. They will, for example, if you're playing Kashtira's, they could very well give you a Plunder Patrol token, or they can give you a monster on the board so you can't constantly special summon your Kashtira's, and that's where Dark Hole will be more beneficial for you than a Raigeki. On the flip side of that as well, Kashtira's do have the ability in Shangri-La to stop Shangri-La being destroyed by card effect by detaching a material. And again, that's where you need to combo it off with something like Eclipse, flip it face down, Raigeki or Dark Hole the board, and you're good to go. Now, obviously, this is using Kashtira's as the main example for this, but when you also consider something like Flunderees, or you consider the tier matchup, less so with the cards like these, because you'll destroy them, they'll be able to trigger their effects. In regards to like the Flunder matchup, being able to kind of Dark Hole or Raigeki their board will permanently get rid of their tribute fodder, meaning that when they activate Dreaming Town, they will have to start all over again and build their board from scratch. But they will ultimately end up on a Penguin or a Riser, so they'll either get either or, they can't get both. So that's it for like kind of board destructions. General negate, I've kind of gone with the ideal one being Dark Rule and No More. Now the issue with this is if you activate Dark Rule and No More, again in specific matchups. So if you do it against the Kashtira matchup, it doesn't really break their board. They'll still keep all of the zones locked. And if they've locked your entire monster zones, unless you've got another follow-up with something like Book of Eclipse or Book of Moon, anything like that, you're still not going to be able to play. So it's a very one-sided card. Against sprites, it can be incredibly powerful. You then just need to deal with a smashers. And then against the tier elements, it's not that great. And against Flunders, like I said, they can just kind of recycle their board state and you still need to deal with Dreaming Town. So it's an okay card. It's probably further down the list. The only other one that you could arguably consider in this format would be something like a Chalice. The issue with Chalice is it only deals with one card. And the reason it is better than Droplet is when you are facing down on a Rise Heart, everything that is sent from the field to the graveyard is banished instead. Or I believe every card is banished instead. So you can't even activate Droplet to pay the cost. So it can be very, very damaging. Continuing on with the Kashtira matchup, but also considering the other matchups, I've gone with kind of like Mind Control or board changing cards. Now, yes, a lot of people will be main decking Triple Tactic Talents, which means that something like this would not be considered as highly relevant for the side deck. But what makes Change Your Heart and even Mind Control very, very important, considering they are both at 1, you can play one of each. The idea behind this is during the standby phase, if you're playing against Kashtira's, Shangri-La will more than likely be triggering its effect to summon out a Kashtira from the deck. That is when during the main phase you can hit them with a Change of Heart or a Mind Control, steal their Arise Heart, and then rank up on top of your Arise Heart, their Arise Heart into your own one. Now, obviously, it is going to be very, very specific and very, very kind of like if they've got 3 materials on that Arise Heart, they could, if they wanted to, chain the effect to banish it. But ultimately, you are getting rid of that Arise Heart. That is what you're doing, is you're getting rid of the Macro Cosmo, and from that point on, you don't really care. It can still be good in a tier element matchup because you can steal their monster that might be providing the most form of interruption to you. You can steal their M-Pen. You can steal their barrier statue. You can also steal... you can attempt to steal an elf, and that would then chain their effect. So it's a little bit less effective in a sprite matchup. But again, being able to steal the monster and then rank on top of it can be very, very important. Moving into Backrow Hate. Now, the Backrow Hate at the moment, the one that I've kind of focused on the most is Twin Twisters. Now, you can consider something like Cosmic Cyclone as well, but the reason I've gone with Twin Twisters is because it deals with multiples. So when you are looking at something along the lines of Lightning Storm or Duster, the issue with those is they have to be activated in the main phase, so it's not exactly that great against something like a Flunderees matchup. Because keeping in mind, the field spell will trigger if you normal summon, and the trap card can only be triggered during the main phase. So if you hit them with a Twin Twister or a Cosmic Cyclone during the draw phase and you know exactly where it is, you can get rid of it straight away. Obviously, Cosmic Cyclone will be a little bit better in the Sulliak kind of route of play. But again, this is when you're kind of comparing it to something like a Harpy's Feather Duster or a Lightning Storm. You kind of want something that is a quick play back row removal. And I feel what we're really missing, and I can't wait to have it, is like a twin Cosmic Cyclone, like discard a card or banish a card from the hand, target 2 cards in the field and banish them. That would be absolutely insane. I'd be well up for a card like that. But for now, Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclone, pretty much the same. The idea is whether you want to be paying life points and getting rid of 1 card, or whether you want to be discarding a card and getting rid of 2 cards. Yes, you can use this under the Kashtira, and the reason it can be good against Kashtiras is they might still have Birth in play, they might still have the trap card in play. It really depends on the version they are playing. Also, if they are playing the adventure package, you do have targets on that one that you can get rid of as well. So it is a kind of optional option for you, but I do feel that when you're comparing the other cards you could be playing, like Raigekis, Lightning Storms, Harpy's Feather Dust, everything like that, Twin Twisters, to me, is probably the one that stands out the most, and other than that, it will be your Cosmic Cyclone. Okay, so going into the single one first, I've gone with Nibiru. Now, the reason I've put Nibiru here rather than something like a Karakura or something that will just ultimately clear a board off is with the pure fact that Nibiru can be dropped during your opponent's turn, and it's very rare that your opponent with a Kashtira deck is going to be able to lock all 5 of your zones before they end their turn. They usually lock all of your zones during your turn, and when that happens, that's where Karakura becomes less effective, because if all of your zones are locked, you can't even activate Karakura to summon herself down. So that could be very, very damaging, whereas Nibiru can be dropped. If your opponent gets a little bit lazy or a little bit like lapsical and doesn't even consider Nibiru, a Nibiru being dropped can wipe them out. Now, obviously, it's a little bit less effective against a Tier Element matchup because they'll be able to trigger effects. It can be good against a Flunder matchup if they get a little bit complacent. And kind of what you want to do is when they search out that barrier statue, or when they go to play that barrier statue play, before that happens, you Nibiru them, clear their board off, and then they're in a little bit more of a trouble and can cause a few issues. You can also look at the Sprite matchup. I think, again, a lot of people, at the moment, the way that Nibiru will work is if a lot of people don't even consider it and don't even think about it, it's one of them cards that you can main deck, and the people will be like, oh yeah, cool, I'm not going to worry about Nibiru game 1, and they might not even have an out for it the game 2, they just then have to start playing around it. So it's a very good option, something for you to consider, and it is, of course, very budget. Moving on to the tribute in board wipes. So we've got Lava Golem. Now you can also consider Ra Sphere mode, and you can also consider Kaijus, but I feel that Lava Golem is like the best middle ground for all of the decks, because not everything is going to put 3 monsters on the board. Sometimes the majority of them will, but you do need to kind of look at it, and the reason that Lava Golem is kind of specific in this sense is it requires you as the player playing Lava Golem to not have your normal summon, or not be able to normal summon that turn. And that's where it kind of becomes a little bit tricky. So your deck needs to specifically be able to play the board, clear the board, and even clear Lava Golem off without relying on a normal summon. Now, Kashtiras are looking at considering maining this. I think it's incredibly powerful because it doesn't trigger the Tier Element effects. It can deal with the Kashtira monsters, clearing them off the board, unlocking all of your zones. It can deal with the Sprite monsters, something like Elf and Toad. It can be very, very powerful as well. And I feel that if you have the ability to main a card like this, you probably will consider doing so. Otherwise, a side deck for a card like this is incredibly powerful. And what makes it so good is it's a card that can't really be stopped. Like, unless your opponent is going to activate... Unless your opponent's going to activate something like a Mask of Restrict, which who's playing Mask of Restrict in 2023, it can be very, very difficult. Now, keep in mind is when it's special summons, that's when you're going to struggle against the Flunder matchup, because you still need to negate or turn off the barrier statue. So that's something that you need to kind of keep that in mind as well. It's not a normal summon, it is a special summon, and that's where something like a Ra Sphere mode might come into a little bit more effectiveness for you, purely because you do need to wait a little bit longer and allow them to kind of build their board. But the thing with Ra Sphere mode is actually a summon, and the other thing about that as well is it's actually quite expensive in comparison to Lava Golem. Like, you can pick up a Lava Golem for like £10, whereas a Sphere mode is a little bit more expensive. So moving on to the final card, I know I've shown you 11 cards, but when you kind of look at them when they're in their pairs and they pretty much do the same job, you can kind of cut it down to 10. And then the last one I've got is Evenly Matched. Now, I know it's still like £15 card, but when we get the Trap Trick structure deck at the end of the month, this is in it, so it does become a very, very easy must-get budget card for you guys, and it's very, very useful, very, very powerful. It can be a single bait for bait, or a 1-for-1 if they do have an Omni Negate on the board, but again, that's where something like a combo with a Dark Ruler plus Evenly pretty much gets you game. The chances are when you're activating an Evenly, your opponent would have committed a lot to the board, and that's one thing, unless they're playing the Adventure Engine that the Kashtiras don't really have, is that they don't have the ability for an Omni Negate, like I said, unless they're playing the Adventure package. Off the back of that as well, when you look at Kashtiras, yes, okay, if Sprites get Toad on board, it can be a little bit more tricky, but Kashtira matchup, Sprite matchup, even the Flunder matchup, and of course the Tier matchup, and the Branding matchup, do not sleep on that as well. The Branding matchup will be very much in and around. Like, their new combos are really, really good. Then this is a card for you. Another one as an honourable mention is Dimension Barrier. The reason I haven't put Dimension Barrier in the top 10 is because It's not so great against tiers. I think sprites have so many different options. It can be very, very good against branded, and it can be very, very good against cash tierers. But even with cash tierers, you'll still leave them with monsters on the board that are still beat monsters that have very good effects. So yes, you might not have not allowed them to get into an Arise Heart or a Shangri-La, so your zones are going to be free, but they still have their ability to kind of attempt to break your board and still push for an OTK. Anyway, I hope you found this list very informative and giving you as much information as I possibly can in regards to these cards. Like I said, I've tried to keep them budget. If you wanted to break the bank a little bit more, you're going to be looking at Triple Tactic Talents if it's not in the main deck. You could start considering something like Lightning Storm, but I still feel that a quick play Backrow Hate is a lot better this format, in my opinion. And then on top of that as well, you can also consider stuff like Triple Tactic Thrusting. But at the moment, pre-orders for something like £40 to £60 a copy, which can be a little bit oof. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, guys, as absolutely always, stay safe and, of course, happy dueling.